All right, welcome back to my channel, Fury the Northman. Thanks for coming back. It's Friday's episode, so we're talking about more of Get to Know the Northman. Last week I said, after I disclosed my three favorite Marvel characters, that being Thor, Captain America, and of course my favorite, Colossus, talking about last Friday, alluding to it and speaking about today, the concept of the multiverse, which comic books had been talking about for decades. If you've read any of DC, and in some cases Marvel does it as well, but in DC for sure, they had the culmination of Crisis of Infinite Earths. They've had Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, just loads of different possibilities. They're all the same Earth, but they're slightly different in some way. So in one Earth, instead of Kal-El becoming Superman, Kal-El becomes Ultraman. And he's a villain, and instead of Batman being Batman, he's Owlman. And he's a villain. That's actually an awesome story. You should check that out. That at all times. But and then of course the Final Crisis is great as well. But the point to me talking about this is that one, I love comics, but I think it's very interesting. You're starting to hear more now on certain podcasts and when you listen to certain quantum physicists and certain scientists that they're actually, I don't know if hypothesizing is the right word or not, but they're definitely promulgating, some of them a theory, where there are infinite versions of you and I and this planet in infinite universes, right? And that the universe is actually infinite, but it's stacked up in layers of the same identical and or slightly different universe type, one on top of the other, and that there's just infinite versions of us and infinite versions of Earth and infinite versions of our sun. And that's an amazing theory. I've been thinking about that. It's actually very interesting. I'm going to go into why that is in a later video. But what I think is so cool about comic books and really about art, there's always this, how can I say this? There's always this push and pull between reality and entertainment and art. And many times art and entertainment can influence reality to start pushing forward with different ideas and technological growth. A good example of that is in the very first Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. After that movie came out, there was real discussion and thought from the standpoint of military contractors and the military industrial complex to pursue possibly cloaking technology that the Predator used to hunt the soldiers. And it's just it's a really cool example of how something that we don't think is possible, we get to see it. Again, I talked about in my very first video how even the horrific nature of a man like Bill Cosby, because black kids could see a black man being a doctor and a black woman being a lawyer, black kids going to university for those two fields just skyrocketed because they got to see that someone like them was doing that. Again, Bill Cosby is the greatest villain of all time. But the point is, comics have pushed forth really a lot of concepts that are now becoming more popular. Like I said, the multiverse theory, the infinite Earths theory, the multiple Earths, etc., that's been going on in comic books for years. In the Marvel Universe, they recently did a culmination, well, it's probably been about 2 or 3 years ago now, where the Ultimate Universe, and I think it's the I think it's the 605 or 1605, but the main continuity universe, they had a convergence and they ended up battling, and it was amazing. But there's always that theme within comic books, and now you're seeing that in our reality, where people are starting to talk about it more as if it is a true possible reality. That our universe could exist on top and underneath of another universe that's just like ours and or slightly different. And I just think that's so fascinating, and it's one thing that I really love about comic books. Also too, since the advent of the Iron Man movies and of course the Avenger movies and how successful people are pursuing an exoskin like armor. The versions we have now are the equivalent of like the caveman version of what could be, or what was in the movie the Mark 12 or whatever he ended up using. The Cutting Edge or Blood Edge or whatever. Great, that's a great suit of armor. But I love that about comics. I really do. A lot of comics too. I enjoy watching like videos about lifting and bodybuilders, and what I've heard a lot of commentators say from the late 80s up to the 90s, they say that, you know, certain bodybuilders, when they come out on stage, they looked like a superhero in the comic books. And if you're old enough to remember comic books from the late 80s into the 90s, there was a huge over-sexualization in Marvel and DC. I mean, the guys were just jacked out of their mind. The women were all exceptionally beautiful and fit. It was a little bit over the top, even for comic books. But what's crazy is that's a good example there too of how even then comics were pushing an ideology that people were picking up and actually manifesting in this reality even then. And it's happening still today, and it really shows you the power of comic books. I'm going to say something that I don't know if a lot of people understand. Comic books are art. They're a legitimate art form that thankfully has aged and grown up with the consumers that read them. And you can find a lot of truths and a lot of strength in comic books. There was one story arc where, I think it was the story arc where Thor finally finds out about the cycle of Ragnarok and has to face the ones that sit above in shadow. It's a great story arc. But he's following the same path of his father, Odin, to gain knowledge, but doing it just like his dad he won't succeed that way. He can follow the same path, but ultimately he has to make his own choices and find really his own way. And so when he goes to the well of knowledge and sacrifices in one eye, nothing happens. He actually has to cut out both eyes. And he asks the crows, well, how will I see? And I think they say something like, well, you won't need to. You'll know where to go. And that's a very interesting point, because the truth is, all sons concerning their fathers and all daughters concerning their mothers. We can walk the same path, but ultimately we have to make our own choices. And I love when comics do that. I love when comics bring this wildly fantastic world of superpowered beings that are, basically the same as the pantheon of Olympus or Norse mythology or whatever the case may be. And then they insert these very real moments, these very real challenges that we as humans have to face, and/or the purpose of this video, which is freaking awesome, a concept of a multiverse that's absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, if that is the way that our universe is set up, where one stacked on top of another, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. That would just be insane. But I love that about comic books. I think it's so exciting to read them and then to see things either get into movies and then or get pushed into reality and or the beginnings of the reality. It's just an awesome experience. And I remember the first time I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about the infinite universe theory, and I was like, I know about this. I've read about this for years in DC, which is kind of ridiculous. But it's just really cool to me how it works out that way. And I would encourage each and every one of you, first off, unless I'm mistaken, I believe the second most popular form of disseminating or spreading out information is actually reading. That's probably going to change here soon with audiobooks. But the first is talking and listening to someone talk. But I would encourage you, for your mind, when you read, especially if you're like me, I'm dyslexic. Reading certain levels, especially collegiate levels, or books on philosophy that can be very dense and or data-laden books that are very dense can be difficult for me to really grasp onto and really digest. But for me, I always found, even with my disability, I always found that it's not a disability. I mean, I'm not going to call it a disability. It's just a hurdle. The way comics were set up, even graphic novels, it was just easier for me to digest. It was just broken up little sections of comments and words that were really easy for me to read. And the purpose of me saying that is I would challenge everyone to read something. Read something. It sharpens your mind. Reading is the weight room for your mind. And there's different skills that you can pick up along the way. You can learn a language. I'm on Duolingo learning German. And just trying to do what I can to strengthen my mind and myself. And it's really not that hard to do it. All you have to do is do your best and read something that sparks your interest. And I'm telling you, comics could be that for you. So I lucked out. Right as I was finishing, my son walked in the room. So guys, thanks for coming back. Like, share, subscribe. That's him. Don't forget to hit the notification bell. We're coming back Monday. I can't wait. Monday's episode of this week sparked great debate and controversy, as well as a lot of agreement. I can't wait for Monday's episode. I'm going to throw gas on the fire. Let's go.